Hello, my name is Karina Ricker. I am the Reference and Government Information Librarian here at the University at Albany. Welcome to this installment of Librarians with Lattes, a podcast dedicated to being informed, reading, and staying caffeinated. Today, we are recording at the Dewey Graduate Library located on the downtown campus. Our guest is Elaine Lazda, Subject Librarian for Social Welfare, Gerontology, and Reference here at the University. Elaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Glad to see you today.
I'm glad to see you. Thanks for making the trip down.
So I noticed you have a beautiful purple and green mug over there, and I'm wondering what might be in it. Is there any caffeinated beverage in there?
Absolutely. We have a Keurig downstairs, so I have 8 o'clock bean.
Okay.
Is my coffee du jour right now down there, and we have reusable Keurig cups to be environmentally conscious, and so I've got that going with cream.
Wonderful. So that's down here in the office?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a well-equipped office then.
That's right. We do it right here at Dewey.
Wonderful. Good. Well, our topic today is open access, and I understand you're quite versant in open access. What are we referring to when we talk about open access?
The best way to explain open access, a lot of people think it's just making stuff free on the internet that is scholarly or scholarly research they're just making it free. But part of the concept behind the open access movement was much of scholarly research comes from government-funded grants or taxpayer-funded grants, if you think about it, right? If the money comes from the government, it came from the taxpayer. So the taxpayers fund this research, the researcher publishes the research, the results, and then we have to pay thousands of dollars for scholarly journals, and the public who paid for this research does not have access to it. Now that kind of made sense in a print world because you had to have publishing in a journal, you had to have paper, you had to have printers, you had to have ink, you had to have editors, right? And all of that costs money. Distributing the physical copies of the journals, some of that made sense, that there would be a price for the subscription. But now we have the internet and people can put stuff up on the web, and there's less of an upfront cost to making and disseminating scholarly journal articles and other scholarly output. So why not make it open? There's definitely a way to make this stuff available to the public who paid for the research, through the internet and through online access points.
So in other words, we don't want to just call it free stuff.
Right, because it's not free.
Yeah.
Somebody paid for the research, and some of the open access models require author publishing costs. So, depending on where the open access article shows up, depending on what platform we make it open on, sometimes an existing publisher will turn on open access for select articles where they've maybe written the costs into the grant. Mm-hmm. And that would be like $300 in a grant. And then the article in the Sage Publisher Journal is open forever and ever for all eternity, but other people who didn't put that cost into their article, the article's behind what we call paywall, which means you have to have a subscription to get the article. And there's a lot of other models. I mean, they call it gold open access, green open access, and I think those are the two. If somebody were interested in the details about that, they should come talk to the librarians, mm-hmm. because it's not super exciting to talk about on a podcast. Okay. But sometimes you have to pay, sometimes you don't have to pay. That's to make it open. And some government funders now require open access, like the National Institute of Health on PubMed. If you publish and it gets put in the library database or the bibliographic database PubMed, you have to make that article publicly available within a year after publication. That's a federal requirement. So sometimes it's required, sometimes it's just good research ethics, It's not required by your discipline, but it's a good thing to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So what sort of materials can be considered to be open? I heard you say articles. Are there other sorts of materials?
Well, we're trying to use the term scholarly output for open content, because now what we're seeing is there's a lot of non-journal article. It's not just PDFs, like most people think of research as showing up in a journal article in a PDF form. But now we have some funder requirements of government agencies want you to make your original data set open that you used to do the analysis and write the article. So we've got open data, which is different types of file formats. We've got computer code. If you used an interesting algorithm or a code, maybe you put it on GitHub or Figshare and you make it open so that other people can use your code to do calculations based on different data, but using your scholarly output of this code. And then we have fine arts people who do art, visual arts and music and interactive stuff that might be, with an aesthetic bent that's not necessarily peer-reviewed PDF article. It might be something you look at and click on or listen to. And then we have the digital humanities stuff. Have you seen some of that stuff?
Tell me about it.
Well, we have a guy here, David Hochfelder, who's doing an interactive map where he has a map of Albany, and you click on it to see, I don't know if people know what redlining is. It was a way of discriminating for giving housing finance and housing, like when they had discriminating based on race, being in certain neighborhoods and not being allowed to buy houses in certain neighborhoods, and the lenders had this red line map. That's what they called it. He has an interactive map where you can click on a residence in this old map of Albany and see where it fit in some of these tracks. Because we don't know. I mean, the banks don't tell you what the red lines were, but you can kind of figure it out from his data and his interactive map where the lines of demarcation were in terms of the neighborhoods that were privileged for, white people and where black people were stuck,
What decade is his data from?
Goes from like the early 1900s to mostly 20th century stuff.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not 100% sure. It's called like 99acres.com, I think. 99 acres something is the URL. But
Well, how is the University at Albany involved with providing our patrons with open access materials?
Well, the libraries have what we call an institutional repository. That's like the library nerd term for it. And it's a platform, it's like web hosting for scholarly output. So people might say, well, why can't I just put it up on my own website, right? Why do I have to make it open on institutional repository for my from my university? Why would I have to do that? And it's because we provide descriptive, what they call metadata, which is information about your article or whatever your scholarship is. And so that makes it what we call discoverable, which means if you search Google Scholar with certain keywords, your stuff will come up and other people will see it. Whereas if you have your own website, it might not be, search engine optimized. And so our stuff is optimized, and our stuff has more descriptions that are more informative and standardized, because librarians are really good, as you know, as
Organizing.
a metadata person yourself, at standardizing the content and the terminology used in that metadata protocol to make it uniform, understandable, accessible to people who want to decide if they want to use it or read it or understand it.
And is that what we're calling the Scholars Archive?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. No, it's fine.
Yes, we call it Scholars Archive.
What's in it for the researcher who chooses to share their scholarship via the Scholars Archive?
Well, there's a couple of things. What we found is by broadening open access to publications, there's a lot of scholarly literature coming out itself saying that if you publish and make your article open, and there's sometimes different versions that you make open, but regardless of what version you publish, you'll have more views, more downloads. You'll be able to see where people are using your research, because a lot of the open platforms like Scholars Archive, but also other ones, have maps that show where people are accessing. For some reason, I have an article that's really big in France, right? And we drilled down and we found there's a nursing school in France that uses this article I did on gerontology. And then there's a librarian here at UAlbany who had one that was in like Nova Scotia or New Brunswick that was being used, and they found out it was on a syllabus of a library school course. So people were accessing it that way to read it for their class. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of really good, rich information for scholars in terms of their impact. But then the other part is what I was starting to tell you before, which is that all of this access does in turn lead to additional citations in scholarly peer-reviewed articles, which is what people want for promotion and tenure. They want to show the impact of their research and that people in their field are building upon it or using it or, giving credit for some additional information that society has now gained as a result of their research, right?
Yeah. Do you think that at universities these standards for tenure are becoming more flexible with regard to open access? Have any experience with that?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. There's some things I would like to see. I would like to see that open textbooks counted as a scholarly output for our faculty who choose to create a textbook, make it open access for the students, which saves huge money for students.
Absolutely.
It improves student retention in courses because they don't drop out. They don't avoid buying the hundreds of dollars of text, so they do better in the class. They don't drop out, and it's just a really good thing. So that one, I would love to see promotion and tenure requirements modified to incorporate textbooks. So right now, textbooks are considered service instead of research, and that's kind of academic in ball, but whatever. Yeah. What I tell people, if they have open articles and they have seen impact that isn't just citation and scholarly peer-reviewed literature, like they see that it's being used on a syllabus, or they see it's being used, in some way, or it hit the newspaper, or I had a French pharmaceutical guy blog my article because he saw it open access, right? Like all these things happen that are impact, and I can write them. I tell people to write them into their narratives. How when we do our dossier and tenure, you write your scholarship narrative. I tell people to note that.
Absolutely.
You can't give a statistic from it, but you can write about the impact sort of within the context of your scholarship narrative. So.
Great. So do we have open access textbooks in our Scholars Archive?
Right now we have 2.
Okay.
We have, I think one is accounting and the other one eludes me. It's either mathematics or business. They're both kind of topics that the fundamentals don't tend to change over time. One of them is definitely accounting. And then we have a scholar here, P.D. Magnus, who's a philosophy professor, and he was on the bleeding edge of open textbooks, and he has one called For All X. It's a logic textbook, and it's used at the University of Cambridge, been adapted and translated in many languages. It's gone global. It's gone viral almost for a textbook, if a textbook could go viral, right? So it's, there's some serious influence in regards to that textbook, and been a textbook juggernaut.
That's great. What does open access mean to the world beyond academia?
Well, it means that one of the things we're finding with open articles, let me start with that. One of the things we're finding with open articles is that people go and read something in the paper, or their doctor tells them something about a health diagnosis, and they read the study in the New York Times or whatever. They read about the study. They can go get the original study and read for themselves what it actually says, which I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of times the article misconstrues the study a little bit. It makes something sound like a definite thing when it's really more like there's a kind of correlation here, but we don't know if it's causing, and that's why we always hear these, like, eggs were bad for you, now eggs are good for you. But now people can go and they're empowered to be able to find that out for themselves. That's the big one, is public health. But it's also like policy. Like if there's a social policy out there, a lot of times there'll be a social science article that talks about the background and, and either corroborates or refutes what the policymakers are saying about that policy, or like, global warming articles, like anything like that. You can go back to the original research as a human being, ordinary citizen. You don't have to be some kind of privileged scholar with an academic library at your disposal to get the information. You can just go and get it.
So not only would you find the article, you'd also find the data?
Many times, yes. And there's this whole citizen science movement that people can do the data. There's this other thing that other people are concerned about, particularly in some of the social sciences, most especially psychology, is this replicability, which means when you do a scientific experiment, it's supposed to be replicable, so that if I do it, and I write out my methodology, and I write out where I got my data from, and I do the analysis, you can take that information, collect the data the same way, apply the same methodology, you're going to get similar results. That's supposed to be the thing that happens. But lots of social science stuff, it's really hard to replicate because they do some kind of collection of data in a very unique circumstance, and then people like grow up, or they change age, they change location, they get married, they get divorced, right? So it's hard to get the same kind of data collected. So you can reuse data, use their data, and then apply their methodology. You can verify their data. You can do things to increase the quality and replicability of research in general, which benefits everybody.
Very good. What takeaways on open access would you like to offer our listeners?
I think the public would be very pleased to know that their taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely. So they, when they hear about open access in the news, or they hear about it from a library, something like that, they should be supportive, and they should be promoting it amongst policymakers. And when these things come up in the public discourse, they should be informed and supportive of it. And then they should also leverage it to their own knowledge and benefit, because most of the stuff is indexed on the internet. There's lots of ways to get at it, and they can educate themselves, and everybody benefits from an educated public, right?
And what would you say to our students about open access here at the university?
Well, the biggest thing for students, I think, is that they learn how to do quality, reliable information discovery in their program of study at UAlbany, right? So they have access to all kinds of paywalled resources, access to all kinds of stuff we pay tons of money for.
Yes, we do.
They learn how to locate that information, evaluate that information, understand that information, but then we send them off into the world, and they have limited access to the same kind of paywalled articles. And a lot of people, like I'm a social work librarian, a lot of people go, what do I have access to once I graduate? And there's ways to get stuff, but it's convoluted. It's, it requires some legwork and paperwork to get, special library cards at special libraries. And, it's not always that easy, but open access is going to let them get the stuff they need, and they're going to have those skills to evaluate the quality of it, and they're going to have the skills to locate it, and then they can get the research that they were afforded, and as it was so easy to get here, and now they'll be easy to get once they move on into the world and are trying to apply it in their professional positions.
So open access is really wonderful for researchers who are not affiliated with a university.
And globally, developing countries which don't have the facilities to subscribe to paywall journal articles, all that stuff. And we're seeing that, and that again raises your impact as a scholar like crazy high, because people from all over the world we have that open textbook, but it's also true with research. They can base their research on something that we put open, and then we see the citation back in Google Scholar, and then there's an international cred for your promotion and tenure dossier.
Wonderful.
I don't know. It's pretty cool, and that global. A lot of the traditional databases that have scholarly articles in them are very Western European and North American focused, and this dissolves that. It just blows it out of the water that we have a global set of information that we're drawing from. And then the other part is disciplinary restrictions. Right now a lot of the information about scholarly research is contained in disciplinary pockets, kind of, PubMed and Archive, which is an open math and science. So they're in these places, and they're open, but they're subject specific. But because they're open and because they're indexed in general search engines, you might have written what they call a computational behavioral science article. So you have some code that you use to track somebody's behavior psychologically on the web, right? So it's computational, so it's computer science, but it's psychology too. So now the psychologist can find your stuff easily, and the computer science person can find your stuff easily without looking for it in places they're not familiar with. Like if they're in their little disciplinary, box, it's still going to be easier to break down that disciplinary wall and foster connections between different fields that you might not have otherwise come across or seen. I mean, that's like a huge part of it, is this interdisciplinary mixing. I don't know.
So for somebody who's on the web, is there a meta site for open access?
Well, we don't have a limit. I mean, there are subject-specific ones that are open, like PubMed, like Archive. There's one called, and Archive is arxiv.org.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's one soxiv.org, which kind of copied Archive, and it's for social science. But so there are some like that model traditional library databases, but you can just go to scholar.google.com and get most of it.
Okay.
You can. And I know a lot of librarians bristle at Google Scholar, which is what that is called. But number one, it's getting better. And number two, if you have like I said, if you were a student at SUNY Albany and you have information literacy knowledge, you know how to sift through the weird stuff or the junky stuff or the poorly annotated stuff and get to the good stuff there. So that would be my argument.
Are there any good Google searching tips for finding the open access materials?
Oh gosh, yes. There's an advanced search on Google Scholar.
Love it.
Come talk to a librarian about that. It's not too hard to find, but if you can't find it, come talk to a librarian. There's also a thing where you can see who's cited within Google Scholar. It'll have the number, so you pull up an article, like result list in Google Scholar, and then it'll say cited 108 times. If you click on that little link, you get 108 articles that used the original article, right? But then the very cool part about that is you can check a box that says cite within citing articles. So you can put in another sub-search, let's call it, and you can say, say you did an article, you knew there was a really good article on alcoholism. It was a fundamental article. It was cited 1,000 times, and then you search that article, you click on the cited by, you get 1,000 articles, but you want to find something that's subcategory of that. You want to find how that article was used in alcoholism as it related to just divorced women or something, right? So you can put divorced women in your sub-search, check the box, search citing articles, and then you get the articles that use that same concepts in the original article, but they're only dealing with your subtopic. And it's a really powerful way to narrow things down that only a couple very expensive library databases do. In the same way, very expensive library databases, but here you can do it for free on Google Scholar. You can drill down to some really relevant things with a couple shortcuts, yeah.
So the takeaway is come talk to a librarian.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Absolutely.
Elaine, thank you for talking with us today. I'm going to be following the progress of our Scholars Archive. I'd like to end our conversation today by giving you the chance to tell us what you've been reading and enjoying these days.
Okay, well, I'm reading 2 books. One is the Anthology of the Rabbit series by John Updike, Run, Rabbit, Run.
Yes.
And it's old, but it's good. And then I'm reading this other book that's really interesting. It's about 5 years old. It's called Laura Warholic. And I can't think of the name of the author, Alexander something. But it's almost like James Joyce style.
Wow.
It's very dense, but it's amazing. And the way it is written is just so quasi-realistic, quasi-surreal. I don't know. It seems like you're watching a cartoon, but a very intelligent cartoon when you read it. I'm totally absorbed in it. It's crazy good.
Thank you. We've been speaking about open access with librarian Elaine Lazda. This is Karina Ricker from the University of Albany Libraries thanking you for checking out Librarians with Lattes, a podcast dedicated to being informed, reading, and staying caffeinated. Thank you all for listening, and remember to read. Read as if the future depends on it, because it does. Thank you.